What if you could reach people where they are to help them move with a step forward, especially when it comes to their legacy? Good afternoon. My name is Angelina Carleton. I'm the hostess of the Design Your Legacy podcast. And this lovely afternoon, I have the pleasure to introduce you to Eric M. Bailey. He's a best-selling author and president of the Bailey Strategic Innovation Group, one of the fastest growing human communication consulting firms in the United States. Eric has a master's degree in leadership and organizational development from St. Louis University. He's been featured on CNN, Huffington Post, Forbes, Like a Real Boss podcast, as well as many other platforms. He's also worked with Google, the United States Air Force, the Los Angeles County as a municipality, the city of St. Louis, Missouri, as well as the Phoenix, Arizona Police Department. Welcome, Mr. Bailey.
Thank you so much, Angelina.
Did I leave anything out of your background, or is there anything you would like to touch base on?
No, I think it's always funny kind of hearing my bio read. It's like, oh, obviously this guy wrote this thing. No, but I'm very proud of my unique experiences, and I love using that to move people forward.
Wonderful. So I know a little bit about your background because, as we've discussed previous to recording in our preamble, I had seen your WBEX recording in my continuing education as a consultant. And one of the things I noted is that you're educating your clients to think more for themselves. You're asking powerful questions and showing us that we can do things that are more than just socially acceptable. So my first question for you, since this is a legacy podcast, is how do you see this word legacy? And what is it that you think is holding most people back from the personal agency of their legacy?
It's a really powerful question. You know, the word legacy for me, it kind of toys back and forth between kind of what I've heard in the media versus what I want it to be for my own life. And it really has to do with who you are and what you will be long after you're gone. And it could be financial, but it also could be ethereal and experiential and emotional. And one of the things that I always keep coming back to is, you know, back in my history of my career, I was in marketing and people wanted to talk all the time about branding. And I think there's actually very similar parallels. And people think branding is all about the logo design and the color choice. And yes, that does eventually roll into branding, but branding is what people think of you when you're not telling them what to think of you. And when, you know, in my case, I'm a professional speaker and a consultant, and when I'm not there, what are people thinking about my work? Like, that is my brand. And when I think about legacy, it's kind of the same thing. It's what are people thinking about you when you're not there? What are people feeling about you and remembering you? And when you think about, you know, what is kind of holding people back from really designing that is most people aren't thinking about it at all, right? Most people aren't thinking about what is their impact on the world right now or will be in the future. They're not thinking about that. And I think that what we can do is really start to realize that we are having an impact on the world around us. And once we start to realize that, now we can maybe start designing what that impact might be.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know that you're very clear on many of the roadblocks that can halt a person in their critical thinking. So some of those roadblocks could be that they just don't realize their biases. What can, and maybe this is a moment where you could speak a little bit into your work for a sec.
Yeah. So when we talk about biases, you know, a lot of people immediately relate that to things like, you know, the racism and the sexism and the ageism. And that's kind of the main focus on, you know, this big, scary word bias. But bias is really a tool that our brain uses to make sense of the infinite flow of information to us. And so we have to take shortcuts to process everything. We have to jump to conclusions. We have to make assumptions. And those are biases. And in many cases, they work for us. They're a tool that our brain uses. And also, in many cases, it can lead us down the wrong path, or it can lead us down some unproductive paths. And so
it protects us, but ...
Absolutely. And I mean, even things like, if you think about some of the biases we have, one of my best examples is I remember when I was maybe 2, maybe 3 years old, and I was kind of toddling around the kitchen, and my mom was spending so much time up on this counter, this one area of the counter, and she was always like doing stuff there, and there were sounds and splashes and all kinds of stuff happening up there on this counter. And so I couldn't see up there, it was too little, and so I wanted to reach up and just see what's going on. And I walk up to her, and she's at this area of the counter. I reach up and she hits my hand and she says, "A hot." And I'm like, "What? Okay, fine." So I walk away and I'm crying because my mommy hit my hand, right? And all this. She was at the stove, right? So she knew that this could be dangerous for me. And so, being a curious little toddler that I was, when she wasn't there, when she left, I walked back up to that counter and I reached up and I touched it and I felt what hot means. And I'm like, hot. And it burned my hand. And I developed this understanding of the world that that thing is dangerous. And I never touched the stove for 5 years, right? Until I actually learned how to cook, because I had this bias, right? This understanding of the world based on one experience, that thing is hot. And I was never burnt, right? So from that point forward, I never got burnt because, right? So it protected me, but also it was a little bit, not fully developed. And so when you start to think about these biases, it's important that we have them, but
Yes.
also it's important that we know what they are so we can challenge them from time to time.
Yeah. So I just, for a moment, before I ask my second question, I just want to highlight the name of your book, which is The Cure for Stupidity. And
Yes.
it makes a lot of people laugh because when it comes to our biases, you've pointed out how easy it is to look across the aisle and say, well, that person is stupid because my experience is more real to me than their experience.
100%. And we actually start to expect the world around us to see things the way that we see it, with all of our education and all of our past experiences and all of our perspectives and perceptions. And we kind of expect everyone else to have what we have because that's what we have seen our entire lives. And when someone doesn't see that, and they react a way that we wouldn't react, our first thought is there must be something wrong with them. Maybe they're stupid. Maybe they're an idiot. Maybe they're irrational. Maybe they're a villain. Maybe, right? And so we come to all these conclusions. And all it is they just have a different way of seeing the world, right? They never touched the stove, and they've never been afraid of that stove. And so they just go up and they start cooking, no big deal, right? Well, we have something else, we see it a different way. And that honestly, that one thing that we perceive things in ways that other people don't, and vice versa, that one thing is the crux of all of our arguments, all of our frustration, all of our, term and toil and all this. It comes from that misunderstanding of expectations.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll get into the illusion of certainty in a moment. And I know you've covered some much needed, even though they're albeit heavy topics such as white privilege and a lot of the political divide that's happening in the country right now. But let me jump back to legacy for a moment.
Yeah.
So I could opine that to design a legacy requires one to be a non-conformist. What say you?
Oh, that's really interesting. I'm always a fan of the nonconformist because what the nonconformist does is the nonconformist moves, honestly, our society forward. I just saw someone shared recently on Facebook, the 99% that aren't offended shouldn't be controlled by the 1% that are. And like, why is this? And I'm like, well, if you think about it, that 1% that has something to complain about, they're the ones that speak up and start a conversation. And when we start a conversation, many of us in the 99% are just in the 99% because that's where everybody else is. We're just like going with the flow. And when we start a conversation, now we have an opportunity to evaluate things under our own accord. And from there, we may decide to go one direction or the other. But it's the nonconformist, it's that 1% that really starts the conversation. And so when you start to think about designing a legacy, if most people aren't doing that, then yes, it's going to take the nonconformist to get people to say, there might be some merit there. There might be something for me to explore there. And that what we're doing is we're sparking someone else's curiosity. And that curiosity spark is the genesis of all great things.
Yeah, absolutely. I just wanted to highlight for a moment, before I get into what you might think are some of the roadblocks when it does come to, um, I would say the typical person or the masses designing a legacy. So one of the things I'm aware of is if somebody comes from a multi-generational family of wealth, they are expected to either continue on a legacy or create one themselves. Now, what's happening demographically is 2/3 of today's affluent are self-made. So we're talking about people that have never thought about this word before are coming on up and they get to influence society. But having said that, obviously their five closest people around them are going to change,
Yes.
from moving from an employee to a business owner to an investor. But I also see sometimes in society what I call I call it the metaphoric crab bucket. In other words, if Eric gets too good, I'm going to pull him down. So how dare I or he think we can design a legacy? What are your thoughts on this?
Oh, that is something that I've been thinking about for years, because if you look at kind of different striations, financial striations of our society, right? We have our uber wealthy, our 0.1 percenters. We have, kind of the bulk of people. Then you have the lower. And if you look at who is talking about money, right? The wealthy and the uber wealthy, they're talking about money like it's no problem. You say, hey, I just bought a new house. And they say, what's your mortgage? Right? And people, kind of the general population is not talking about money. This came really kind of into sharp focus for me when I started reading about, I don't remember the name of the organization, but they publish every single person's salary for everybody to see, right? Our first reaction is like, no, don't do that. And the only reason we would reject that is, one, we're just not used to it. But two, what it might do is make people feel bad. And why would it make people feel bad? It might make people feel bad because there might be inequity in pay. And so really, this idea that we're not supposed to talk about money benefits the people that are having inequity in pay, right? And so what we want to do is we want to start talking about our legacy. We want to start talking about where we are, where we want to go. We want to talk about these things with as many people as we can to remove the stigma, right? Because we all have stories of where we were and where we've been and where we're going. But if we continue to talk about it, we learn to talk about what are the words we need to use. Well, then we can start talking about and seeing things we've never been able to see before. Oh, wait, so you mean I can invest certain things? I can purchase certain things. I can save certain things. What this person is doing, that person is doing. I actually just read about this really interesting strategy called, I can't remember what it is, the official name of it. But basically, someone is renting a house, just renting an apartment or renting a house, and then subletting it on Airbnb.
Oh,
So
sure.
it's like rental arbitrage, I think it was called.
Okay.
And so I've never heard of this, and I never would have heard about it unless I started talking to somebody about financial instruments and creativity. And when we kind of remove that stigma of this, all of a sudden we're having much better conversations and we can start designing legacies.
Absolutely. So I might say, I think it's common sense for all to design a legacy. And I think one of the things you were just pointing to was, maybe I might call it the ability to open one's mind and invite this new information in. But one of the things you've studied is what happens to the human mind when change comes about. So here's my next question for you. So even though I think it might seem common sense for all to take personal agency of our higher purpose, in knowing what you know about social engineering, what might you recommend in how we could educate the masses or the typical person on this subject? Because not everyone likes change.
Right, 100%. So there's a couple things at play here, right? So one, most people reject change because they associate it with something wrong with what they've done in the past. And we all know that our past defines us. It doesn't actually, but that's what we feel. We feel like
We
it
make
defines
everything
us.
personal, even if it doesn't have to be.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so if you're going to come and tell me that there's a better way to do it, I'm thinking, Are you saying that there's something wrong with the way that I've done it? Are you saying there's something wrong with me? Right. And then honestly, when we come with this idea of common sense, and this is actually really powerful, right? What we're saying is everyone should know this. And if you don't know this, you're stupid, right? Because it's sense. We're talking about intelligence, and you don't intend it that way, but that's how people are receiving it. And so that's why it's so important to find where people are. And that's kind of where my mission is find where people are, and really like dive in and be a detective and find out where they are, and then help them take one step, because one step is easy, right? If you're telling me to take one step forward, I can do that. If you're telling me to set up a will, that's really stressful. If you're telling me, right, to start a LLC, I don't know what to do, right? But if you say, okay, Eric, what, where are you with your salary right now? What is one thing you can do to advance that? Right. And there's like, just take one step. And that's where we start to bring people along. And it is difficult, because when we go through change, our brain is actually designed to resist change. That's one of the biases we have. It's called status quo bias. We actually have a preference to keep things the same. But here's the ironic part, is that our being, our soul, our life actually thrives as we progress. So if you think about, you've heard of all these stories of people that win the lottery and then they go into super deep depression. Well, why does that happen? Well, because they think that all they wanted was money, and they quit their job and they sit on their couch with, $1 million in the bank, and they think, oh, I've got to buy everything now. And so you buy $1 million worth of crap you don't need. And then like you see like their happiness diving down and go into depression, and we actually crave progress, but our brains crave stasis. And that's kind of that push-pull that we're always kind of working with.
Yeah. And the other thing I wanted to touch upon, you just mentioned the lottery winners. And in my review of your other podcasts before this one, you had talked about this kind of landscape right now. And it's not just executives, but the loneliness epidemic, because people are not reaching across the aisle to say, let me be curious about what your experience is. And so one of the things that can happen when it comes to nonconformity is this concept called friends versus friendly. So let's say I'm Eric and I get to design my legacy. I might not get to be friends with as many people as I thought I could be, but I'm required to be friendly. But now it just has shrunk in my world, but all I thought was that I wanted to win the lottery.
Right.
Yeah.
The idea.
And then there's all these other things that come with it, like the loneliness. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. As it turns out, we are, as an American society, we are the most lonely we have ever been. And people at work are reporting higher loneliness numbers. And this is even before the pandemic started. So like now it's even worse, right? But what's happening is everybody has this deep desire to be understood, and has a second place, maybe third, fourth, or maybe 10th place, to actually understand other people. And so if we're always going around trying to be understood and no one else is wanting to go do the understanding, well, we end up separating. And honestly, many marriages fall apart because the spouses don't feel understood by the other. Yeah. And so we end up feeling lonely. And it's sort of this idea of the loneliness epidemic. It's hard because I don't know if you ever felt like truly understood by somebody, like somebody that like they heard you, like they feel you, they've repeated back what you said, but like not just the words, but the actual understanding of it.
That's rarefied air in a bottle right there.
It is. It's so rare. And it feels so good. If it's ever happened, it feels so good. And my thought is, what if we had the opportunity to give that to somebody? Like, what if we had the opportunity to give that to everybody? And if we had this entire army of people going around just trying to give people that feeling of being totally understood, like we would change the world. And as we go through and start thinking about our legacy, right? Our financial legacy, our emotional legacy, our educational legacy, right? Our DNA legacy. Like I want a path behind, a wake behind me of understanding. And that I mean, I'd be happy forever, literally, you know?
So before I go on to my next question, I want to highlight something that you also shared before, which I thought is critical to our conversation. I'm just going to kind of throw it out there. That when 9/11 happened, there was a shared experience where we could have oxytocin and bond together. But with the latest pandemic, plandemic, whatever side of the aisle somebody sits on, whether it was, all of the above opinions, and I'm not going to get on into, that, but it became then instead of a shared experience, a divided experience.
Mhm. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's one of the biggest. I'm gonna say it's a bummer for me because we missed out on this great opportunity to come together like deeply. And so there's a lot of research that shows that when we go through something traumatic, that actually stands out in our memories. Like we can all remember where we were when the second tower went down, and when we can also remember who we were with, right? If we were with anybody, because when we go through something traumatic with that person, what happens, we just replay that over and over in our heads, and that cements a really powerful memory. Well, with this pandemic, we all went through something traumatic, whether we lost people, lost jobs, lost the ability to pay for gas, like all of that, or couldn't find toilet paper. It's all traumatic, right?
right.
And what happened is the first couple of months, we actually did a great job of coming together. We really did, around the world. It was really powerful. And then we kind of got fatigued, right? It was hard, it got tiring. And so you see people kind of fracture. And one of the biggest fracture points that I saw, and I work with a lot of organizations around the world, one of the biggest fracture points was around this idea of the essential worker. And so we have some people that were forced to go to work every day and do their essential duties. And then we had this group of people that were able to work from home. I'm blessed and privileged to be on that side, that I was able to work from home and kind of rejigger my entire business to make sense to work from home. But what happened is now these two groups of people aren't sharing an experience. Now it's, oh, you get to work from home. And then
You got to digitize your business.
You got to digitize your business. Yeah. And then we have people who are working from home who want to go to work. Like, oh, well, you get to go to work. And so now we're seeing is, oh, it's so unfair. I have to go through this. You get to do, right? And so we're fracturing and splintering and moving farther apart. And from that point of view, it becomes one of the most natural human experiences, us versus them. And from that point, we're not enjoying each other's company. We're not sharing things. We actually are losing our ability to empathize with each other because now we're on two different teams. And that teaming, what we call tribalism, is actually really powerful, and it actually divides us even further.
Yeah, because if you've got more access to resources than I do, now the idea of bonding goes out the window.
Right, right. And yeah, so the opportunity really is, can we come back and discuss what we have shared? Because it's almost always there, right? It's almost always there. Like, I mean, when you talk about the hunt for toilet paper, right? We all went through that in 2020. We all were searching for toilet paper, and we were all stressing that we wouldn't be able to get it. And now that that's all resolved, we can go back and say, oh, that is something we all shared. And we can kind of laugh about it, and we can kind of tell our stories about it, that we're at Costco and there's people fighting or whatever. And that can bring us back together. But if we focus only on that which we were different, it's not going to allow us to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And those people with those duvets.
Yeah.
But okay, so let's chat for a minute about the illusion of certainty. And I think in your words, this is kind of where we have our certain beliefs. So if you'd like to speak for a moment on how you see it, but my real question around this area is what do you think we are certain of when it comes to the idea of our legacy, and then what comes up for you?
Yeah, I love that. So the illusion of certainty is likely my most important principle, right? Of all the principles of human understanding. And it has this idea that, kind of as we were talking about earlier, what you've experienced, what you've learned, what you've seen, right? That kind of shapes your world. And this is the world I live in. And what the illusion of certainty does is, instead of it being, I believe it to be this way, like imagine like grabbing onto something so tight that your knuckles will turn colors, right? And you, instead of being, I believe it to be this way, we end up saying, it is this way. I know it is this way.
And
And
fighting
that's
for our beliefs.
yes.
Yeah.
And that's really, that's where the illusion comes in, because for me, in my context, in my experience, I have seen it this way. That's really what we're trying to say. But the illusion of certainty, we wrap it up into so much of a tighter package and say, I know it's this way. And where we fight with other people is they have a different illusion of certainty, right? And what we want to do, and the reason we do this is because it is more productive for us to know something. Even if we're kind of on the edge, it's more productive for us to know it and trust in it and expect it in the future than it is for us to hold it loosely and say it might be. And so our brains all the time want to jump into this idea of I know. And here's a perfect exercise for you. Do you have a pen handy?
I do.
All right. So do you have a piece of paper handy? And people watching this, you can do this along. Grab a pen, grab a piece of paper. Do you know what a bicycle looks like?
Yes.
Yeah, of course, right? Everyone knows what a bicycle looks like. Okay, do me a favor and draw one. Draw a bicycle.
Right now on my sketch
right
pad?
Now, go and draw it on the sketch pad. Yeah, go ahead and draw it. And I'll keep talking as you do it. So I'll give you about a minute or so. And so as you're drawing your bicycle, I want you to be thinking about what are the elements of the bicycle and whatnot. And this is usually the moment. See, I don't know if you saw your face. You just realized, oh my gosh, I don't know how to draw a bicycle, right? I don't know, right, where things go. And almost every adult that tries this, so we can get it to show up there. Yeah, okay, that's not a good bicycle. And the funny thing is, there's a lot of research that's done, and almost every adult that tries to draw a bicycle, if you were to make that thing in real life, it would not function, right? You wouldn't be able to steer it. You don't have a steering wheel or a steering handlebars. And the illusion of certainty is this. When I asked you, do you know what a bicycle looks like? Yeah, obviously, right? That's the illusion, right? Our brain gives more certainty to something that we actually aren't actually certain about. And so when you think about the bicycle is just one example, I've got a million of these. And when you think about this, oh, how many times do I project certainty into the world where there isn't actually certainty? And that's powerful. And so when you think about this idea of a legacy, well, what is the illusion of certainty kind of guiding me towards in this idea? I can't do it. I don't have enough. I don't have the education. It's not just an idea. I'm certain about it. I am certain that I can't make it work. I am certain
it's for
that
those people.
Right. Those people, they can, I can't. And when you do that, what the illusion of certainty is actually preventing you from is learning or being curious about something or trying something new. And that is a really interesting idea when you realize that your brain is actually working against you, against what you state are your best interests in mind.
So what are you certain about when it comes to legacy?
Well, it's so funny. So I spend a lot of time being curious. So less in certainty and more in curiosity. And so I'm always trying to learn more, read more, and figure out what other people are doing. And so what I try to do all the time is, and actually really interesting, my best friends, they're a family of 5, family of 6, 2 parents and 4 kids. And they just sold everything and moved to Portugal. Moved across the world, right, with 4 kids, and the kids aren't like grown-up kids. It's their oldest is turning 15 in about a month or so, and their youngest is 8 years old. And so it's like they're right in the middle of the parenting phase, and they're moving to Portugal. Why are they doing that? Well, because they want to leave a different kind of legacy for their kids, and they have investments that they have at home, and they're still generating wealth as they're traveling the world. And it's like, oh, right, there might be something out there that I've never even thought of. And that's so what I'm certain of is I'm certain that there's more I don't know, and I always keep myself in this place of curiosity so I can keep learning.
That's wonderful. I was actually kind of fishing to hear if you were going to say a legacy is for me.
Ah, yeah, as far as I think about what comes next. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And I think the other thing that you're pointing to is that they are intentionally designing it.
Yes.
So many Americans could just fall back to the default, or what I like to say on my podcast, as well as Instagram page often, is what apathy is doing to your legacy is just not right.
Mm.
Um, and yet they are intentionally designing it, even if that means taking a risk to go across the pond to Spain, which is a different language unless they already speak, Spanish
Mm-hmm.
or
Oh, they're
Portuguese.
Portuguese. Yeah, they're in Portugal. They're speaking Portuguese, and they don't speak any, right? And so the kids are
But on
actually
Bob.
starting, right? The kids are learning Portuguese. This week they're starting school in Portugal in Portuguese, and so they're going to be learning school, like doing school in a language they don't know. So they're learning the language and learning the lessons. And it's like, how many people come to the States and do that same thing? It's like, wow, now they're opening their world to what other people go. It's like, oh, it's so
That's
beautiful.
awesome. It's almost like reverse immigration.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit here.
Yeah.
You mentioned that there's a tribe in Africa, and they were not told about the color blue. So when they were shown 3 different shades of green, they could communicate it. And I think where you were pointing the flashlight is that when we can be given language, it's much easier for us to be able to communicate an experience, a distinction. And so this is where I'm going to put you on the spot. What would you like your legacy to be?
Ooh.
Because you've got great language when it comes to taking inventory, emotional intelligence, and so forth.
Yeah, that's a really great question. And the idea of kind of having the distinction, right, around the language of distinction and how that helps you see and communicate. Before I get to your question, I'm going to kind of give you one example of what I mean by that. So you think about when you buy your car. I don't know what kind of car you drive, but let's
Mercedes.
say Mercedes. What kind of Mercedes do you drive?
I think it's a C300.
All right.
Silver.
So you buy your silver Mercedes 300 and you love it. It's the plushest, nicest. You're so happy when you drive this thing, and you start getting out on the road. And do you start seeing more Mercedes out on the road when, like, after you bought yours, you start seeing more silver ones and more 300s? Like, they're everywhere, right? And it's like everyone has the same experience of, right, buying a car and then seeing it everywhere. And that's what this idea of distinction actually will do for us, is it helps us be able to see it in the world. And so having language, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, in noticing things in the landscape that perhaps we skipped over before.
100%.
When it was always there.
Yep, 100%. And so having the right language gives you the ability to see things that were there before. And so with this idea of, what is my legacy going to be, right? So without going into too much detail, when I was growing up, I had a period of time where I was homeless. And from being a homeless kid in Seattle to now running my business and, having a marriage that lasted longer than my parents' marriage. And I've got children who are getting better grades than I ever got, right?
Okay,
So now,
I'm sorry to interrupt, but you had the aunt that told you to overdress, to always look your best.
Yep.
Okay, so I'm sorry to interrupt. I was just wanting to fill in a little bit of context. So where was your aunt?
Yeah, so she was there. So without going into too much, there was some abuse that was happening in the household, and so we kind of ran away for safety.
Okay.
And so once that period was over, I actually spent a lot of time growing up with my Aunt Linda. And she told me, I mean, she was always so well dressed, and she said, you always want to be one level above the room. And so if people are dressing casual, you dress casual smart. Or if people are dressed, business casual, then you dress business professional. You always want to just be one level above. And what happens is, being a Black male, right, there's already enough assumptions out there about me. And so let's not let the clothing be another reinforcer of any of those assumptions.
Yeah, I also want to put you on the spot. You're also 25% Japanese.
I also am 25% Japanese. Absolutely.
But I also realize what you're pointing to regarding how society or people in society might still perceive you.
Yes. Yeah. 100%. And it's not a poor me situation. And then also, it's not everyone perceives me differently, but there's enough research out there that we know that enough people will perceive me, or just have an initial thought that maybe there's some work to be done there. And so when I start to think about, designing what comes next, right? I want to design, I want to be that 2/3 that are kind of self-made. And how do I learn to develop intergenerational wealth, right? So I'm not worried about my kids as much as I'm worried about my grandkids, right? How do I make it there? Because wealth comes,
Money
money
comes and
comes and
goes,
goes,
and the
right?
property comes and goes. Right.
Right, right. And so it's not just about, just giving money down generations, but it's about how can I create a system so that the next generation understands things that I never could have comprehended, right? And they can take what we've done and build it out. And so our kiddos, you're right, I got to say at 14, 10, and 9, they've already started 2 businesses, and they're kind of getting both of those off the ground right now. And we're teaching them about how money actually works, and what income means, and what revenue means, and taxes, and all that. And so like we're teaching them these things that people don't teach us in schools,
Oh,
right?
they forget the financial literacy bit. Are you breaking out the Robert Kiyosaki books?
Yes, absolutely, yeah. And also Millionaire Next Door, and like there's so many wonderful books out there that are just ready to teach us, no matter our age, right, how the world of finances work, how the world works beyond what we're taught in the classroom.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I almost wondered if you were going to say that your legacy would be for society to reframe their views so that they are able to think and act with full awareness. But maybe that's just my words.
No. It's interesting. So what I want to do, what I want my legacy to be, honestly, is I want people to be curious, and I want to leave a trail behind me of curiosity. And so when I teach my kids about finances, the goal isn't for them to just learn everything. The goal is for them to want to learn everything. And I tell
the hunger.
yes, it's the hunger.
Yeah.
And I tell my kids all the time, because I grew up, I'm a know-it-all. Like I want to know all the facts and prove how smart I am, whatever. And my kids are growing up in the same way, right? It's like, this is what we do, right? We pass these things on unconsciously. But what I tell my kids all the time is learning is more important than knowing. And if I can leave behind me a path of curiosity, then I know I will have made a small dent in the world. And I hope that dent can get bigger and bigger over time. But really, I want to leave a path of curiosity.
That's wonderful. I think that they say that oftentimes when we actually do learn and take it in, we also realize how much we don't know.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
That's wonderful.
The more we learn, the more we realize we don't know. Absolutely.
Thank you for being so transparent. So here comes my next question then regarding distinctions. And thank you for, again, being so honest and authentic.
Yeah.
What gets missed in society then when we don't take personal agency of designing a legacy? Is it just that same old in the status quo, or is it that we're stunting our own growth? What words and language would you give it, Mr.
Yeah,
Bailey?
all of it. The thing is, we are so comfortable in where we are now. Not that we want it forever, but we're so kind of settled in it that it feels easier. And unfortunately, we get stuck in that ease. And what happens if we're not trying to design our legacy, not trying to design our world around us, we just kind of just keep staying where we are. And we look back 10 years and say, all these things, all these dreams I had, all these ideas I had are just still dreams and ideas, and I kind of forgot about them. And what I think is we get kind of stuck in the stasis, this kind of status quo. And we're, like I said earlier, we want to do that. We have this desire, this bias for status quo. But it's
easier. We're conserving calories.
It's so easy. It's so easy. But the real impact of that is, honestly, there are people around us that are moving and growing, and our group of friends may change over time, right? The people that we look up to may not want to spend time with us anymore because they're moving into different striations of life. They're curious about other things, and they're going towards other pursuits. And what may happen is we may end up find ourselves kind of feeling bitter or feeling frustrated.
Because you've got the big red fire truck, Eric, and I don't.
Right. And
now you're being friendly with me, but we're not friends.
We're not friends anymore. And so what we really need to do is, so there's kind of this idea that I have that I talk with people about, and I say, okay, what is it that you truly want? And I want you to really deeply think about this idea. What do you truly want? And then what are you doing? And if what you're doing is not in line with what you truly want, then either that's not what you truly want, or you need to change your behavior. And one of those two things has to happen. And I think that kind of that reality of sinking in of, okay, what I truly want and how would I behave if I truly wanted it? All of a sudden, we're like, wait a minute. I guess if I want to have a stronger relationship with my children, I should probably spend more time with my children. If I want to have a stronger relationship with my spouse, I should probably try to do things my spouse likes to do or listen to my spouse. If I want to have a better relationship with my finances, maybe I should try to actually look at my full financial picture, right? And so all these things we can really do if we kind of take one step outside of the stasis.
Lovely, lovely. So, as you take the stage with companies like Google, and I think you said you might even take the stage with someone like George Clooney.
Yeah, actually. So I did a conference and George Clooney was one of the other speakers. Yes.
Okay, so here's my question to you regarding your book, and I know that you will give out, or somebody can buy an autographed copy. So I'm putting you on the spot again. So regarding your book, what principle in there do you think applies the most when it comes to designing a legacy?
Yeah. So one of the principles, and I don't know the number of it just off the top of my head, but it's perception is more important than reality. And the reason that's so important to me is this idea that we think that people say perception equals reality. Well, it doesn't. Perception does not equal reality, right? But our perceptions of things, those predicate our behaviors. Those predicate the way in which we're going to engage in the world. And so when we think about perception is more important than reality, what that means is that the way in which we see things is likely going to be in line with what we choose to do. And if we're talking about designing our legacy, then maybe it's going to require an adjustment of our perceptions or an opening of the possibility of other perceptions. Or if we are, for me in my situation, my legacy is about helping people. My legacy is about curiosity and helping people. So what I need to do is I need to be in a situation where I'm always curious about other people's perceptions. And what that means functionally is I need to talk to people with respect that I disagree with. I need to go to the people on the other side of the conversation, the other side of the debate, and try to be curious and learn about them, because that teaches me and that allows me to be curious and kind of leave that legacy. And so when you think about perception is more important than reality, a lot of times what we want to do is say, I know this to be true. This is reality.
That's the opening of a political speech. Keep going.
Right. But what we really could do, is we could say, I believe it to be this way. What do you believe? And your belief and my belief can coexist, right? Your belief is this, my belief is, those can coexist. But if I say, I know it is this way, and you say, I know it is that way, those can't coexist. It can't be both. And so if we hold it a little looser, say, okay, I believe it to be this way. What do you believe? And I get curious. And then I genuinely don't care about your belief. What I care about is what's underneath it. And as you start to explain your belief, I learn more about you. And that is the most important thing. If I can understand you, now we can have a much better, more powerful dialogue together.
And the legacy becomes much more human.
Exactly.
Yeah. So it's not just a name on the side of a library, a building, a school, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, lovely. So as we kind of start to come to a close, here's my second to last question. So intuitively, I can guess that you didn't like what you saw when you looked out into the baseline and you thought to yourself, I'm going to take proactive action. But this is the part where I'm actually beyond my presumptions and assumptions and my illusions of certainty. What I'm curious about the motivation behind why you would like to create awareness to educate others beyond where they're at right now, and having us all level up.
Yeah. So this may surprise you, may not. I'm a professional speaker, but I'm actually an introvert. And I don't know if you know much about that or your audience does, but introverts are people who gain energy in solitude, in quieter environments. Extroverts are people who gain energy among other people, right? And so as an introvert, I always found that given an opportunity to speak, I wouldn't speak, right? Because I prefer let me just think about it first, and then I'll speak about it later. And so I found that more often than not, I was not understood by my family members, by my spouse, right? I just was never understood. And so I had this deep desire to be understood. And I realized that all of us have this deep desire to be understood. And as I'm out there, I kind of learned to get curious about other people's desires and what do people want out of the world. And I started to try to understand other people. And I would see two people like fighting about something, debating about something, arguing about something. And it was very easy for me to see both of their sides. Like I'd see, oh, this is why you're saying this, and this is why they're saying that. And it was so easy for me to see it. And I realized that as you know, our society has progressed here over the last, I don't know, 30 years, we've kind of been pulling away from each other and understanding each other. And I realized there's a really important need for us to come back together. And so as I started to do my work and started my business, I realized that is a specific area that I can fill naturally, because that's who I am as a person. And so I started doing that work. And as I started doing it, I developed these principles of human understanding. But as I'm working with a group, I can only go through 2 or 3 of them, or maybe 3 or 4 of them together at a time. And people kept asking me, I want all 22. I want all of them. How can I get all of them? And so I'm like, well, let me figure it out. And so I started writing the book. And
But I
that's,
do think people want the roadmap for those who
yes.
want to know.
Yes, absolutely. Because it makes the complete picture, because they get so much out of the 2 or 3 that they learned. I want to know all of it. And so that was actually the impetus of writing the book is, you know, I'm sitting here watching the news like everybody else, seeing Congress tear themselves apart. And I see people yelling at each other because they put the wrong political sign in the front yard. And it's like, wait a minute, like we should be able to understand each other. We should be able to communicate when we disagree. And so I started writing the book, and that's how that happened.
That's lovely. Yeah, I couldn't talk about Donald Trump at my wedding dinner.
Yeah, because people get so super emotional about it.
They get
And
triggered.
they triggered. And what I want to do is I would love a society where we can talk about Donald Trump or talk about Joe Biden and have an intellectual conversation about what we're feeling, what we're thinking, without it turning into an attack on your character.
Yeah.
Yeah, because that's where we need to be. We need to be able to discuss these things so that we can engage and learn each other. And anyway, that's where I think we could go if everyone took a chance and read the book.
Wonderful. So final question, what values get honored when you get to design your legacy? And then we'll wrap.
Great question. The values of kindness, patience, and understanding. And I know understanding isn't technically a value, but I'm going to call it a value because it means so much to me. And being able to understand people, and when my legacy, it persists long after I'm gone, and if people are being kind and understanding one another, if people are living those values, then I know I will have made a meaningful difference in the world.
And that impact.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Eric, for being a change maker and bringing the connection back, because as much as I would like to say these are common sense things, sometimes they were not talked about in public or private school growing up. Maybe they weren't talked about at the kitchen table or the dining room table and so forth. And then we find ourselves as adults and trying to navigate communications and relationships, whether it's in the business world or outside of the business world, because it kind of becomes all relationships when you get to a certain point, whether you're friends or friendly.
Right.
So thank you so much. And I'll just wrap with the closing paragraph. Okay. All right. So in closing, I'm Angelina Carleton, the hostess of the Design Your Legacy podcast, as well as the founder to Legacy Planning, a boutique coaching and advisory firm based out of Beverly Hills, California, but international in those I coach. I hope to dive deep into subjects that can help a person define, develop, and execute their legacy, and continue to scour the landscape for those who can be great resources to every dimension of your legacy. For many listeners, there can never be enough education and preparation in the moat around your your castle. Whether you find yourself with new wealth or generational wealth, may the content of this channel be an anchor in any storms ahead. We do our best to provide original content. And if you're watching on YouTube, please like and subscribe. Or if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, please rate and review. Thank you so much for joining. And thank you, Mr. Bailey, for being an excellent guest speaker.
My pleasure.